the previous videos, we talked about clause 26, which is the determinations of own employment by the contractor. There is a process where the contractor can decide his own employment with the project in the case that the employer is default. The process here seems to be quite similar to clause 25, which is the determinations of contractor's employment by the employer. The two clauses here seems to be quite similar in most of the aspect. The main differences between the two clauses here it will be which party determining the employment of the contractor, which in clause 25 it will be the employer, and clause 26 it will be the contractor himself. The reason of determining the contractor's employment it will be due to the default by the contractor or the default by the employer. We also highlighted a few differences between the clause 26 and 25 in our previous videos. This can be systematically organized in this slide. In these videos, we're going to make comparison between the two clauses here, outlining the differences between the two clauses here. It is so that you have better comprehensions in terms of the process of the two clauses. First, clause 25 is about determining the employment of the contractor by the employer. The initiative is taken by the employer, while clause 26 is about the determining the employment of the contractor by the contractor himself. Now the person doing the initiative is the contractor. The reason of employer to determine the contractor's employment, it is due to the problem with the contractor. The contractor is at default. These are the circumstances where the contractor can be considered default. Now in clause 26, the default is due to the employer. The circumstances that the employer is considered default is listed here. Now that the employer is trying to terminate the contractor, the employer will need to take the initiative and give written notice to the contractor. There will be 2 written notice required in order to complete the termination process. In contrary to the clause 25, when the contractor decided to terminate himself, the notice shall be given by the contractors to the employer. Also here will require 2 written notice. Next, once the contractor is terminated, no payment by the employer to the contractor before the completion of work. This also includes those certified but pending payment. Since the problem is due to the contractor, the employer will need to hire somebody else to proceed with the work until the entire work is completed. Then the payment shall be settled between the employer and the contractor. However, in the case of clause 26, now the problem is due to the employer. It is not due to the fault of the contractor. With that, if the contractor decided to terminate himself, the employer will need to pay to the contractor immediately. Regarding the claim, the employer is entitled to claim for the liquidated damage as well as all the other losses and all expenses suffered due to the determinations of the contractor's employment. As for clause 26, the contractor will be able to claim for the work that has been properly done, the value of the materials and goods supplied, as well as the loss and expenses suffered by the contractor. Because of the default of the employer, the contractor experienced loss and expenses. this shall be charged to the employer, which in this case here, the problem is with the contractor. Now the employer is suffering the loss and expenses, therefore this should be charged to the contractor. Next is about the calling for record, which is the joint inspections with the architect and quantity surveyor. Under clause 25, problem with the contractor, the employer side will need to call for record in order to determine the extent of the work executed as well as the materials and goods delivered to the site. This is very important as this shall influence the final account later. Under clause 25, it is the architect and quantity surveyor taking the initiative for this call for record or joint inspections with the contractor. However, under clause 26, the contractor should call for the record, get the architect and quantity surveyor to come and do the joint inspections to determine the extent of the work executed as well as the materials and goods delivered to the site. This is important because it eventually shall govern the final account later. Now regarding the final account, it will be the final figure to conclude the entire project up to the date of determinations. There will be some already paid to the contractor, and this shall be compared with the final account. If the final account is more than the sum paid by the contractor, that means there will be differences between the two values. It depends this final account produced by who. Now, if the final account is produced by the architect and quantity surveyor, when the value in the final account is more than the total amount paid in the contract, that means the contractor has been considered overpaid. The contractor will need to pay back to the employer. Now, if the final account is produced by the contractor, when the final account value is more than the sum paid to the contractor, that means the employer still owes money to the contractor. With that, the employer will still need to pay to the contractor. So now in terms of the final account here, under clause 25 is produced by the architect and quantity surveyor, while under clause 26 it is produced by the contractor. There may be dispute arise. There will be one chance for the disputing party to raise the dispute, and it will be up to the contractor or the architect or quantity surveyors to conclude the final account. It shall depend on the justifications to determine if the amendment is required for the original versions of the final account. If both parties still cannot come to an agreement, the disputing party may refer to the arbitrations within 3 months. This is when the third party start interfering in terms of the final figures payable to the contractor to conclude the entire project.